Hi there, welcome back to our latest video where we're taking a look at a past exam question for AQA A-level Business. This is a 16 marker and just taking a look at how we could unpick the question and come up with a suggested answer and approach. This one is based around the Chillax case study, and the 16 mark question in paper 2 was this: to what extent should all businesses be concerned if they have high rates of labour turnover? This is one of these classic 16 mark open questions where we have to consider not just the case study business, Chillax, but also other business situations, just to provide some balance in terms of the range of situations. That helps us meet the demands of the question, doesn't it? So this question is all about, clearly, labour turnover, and our arguments need, and our conclusion, because there's 16 marks, so there's evaluation marks going, needs to assess to what extent businesses should be concerned or not concerned about having high rates of labour turnover. 16 mark question, so there is evaluation. We clearly need some balance to our arguments, and our judgment, our conclusion, needs to be supported by those arguments. The words to focus on there are high labour turnover. That's what we need to stay relentlessly focused on throughout the response. Just going back to these 16 mark questions, 16 marks isn't a lot of, so it doesn't give you a lot of time to provide a full response to these type of questions. So I think the most efficient way is to deal with the case study and use it, because why wouldn't you use the case study? But then also to address these other situations in your counter argument. That way you're going to get the range of arguments that you need. So for example, with this, you would start off by arguing how and why Chillax should be concerned about having a high rate of labour turnover, and then flip the argument on its head and consider other businesses to address the all businesses aspect, the open aspect. So you would then consider in a paragraph how and why other businesses, not Chillax, ideally other industries, markets or whatever, they should not be concerned about having high labour turnover. And then, of course, we need to conclude a supported judgment based around our arguments that have preceded it. Well, let's just quickly remind ourselves about Chillax, the case study. We were looking at a successful, high-quality spa, hotel and spa business. And in particular, Chillax invested heavily in its staff. Consequently, it had a high employee retention rate and therefore a low rate of labour turnover. And that benefited the business because it gave them the advantage, or an advantage, in terms of the consistency and quality of customer experience. And that was clearly an advantage compared with competitors nearby. So clearly, Chillax would be concerned about moving from a situation of low labour turnover to where it might have high turnover. So we develop an argument in that sense, but then we need to consider one or two situations and reasons why high labour turnover might not be a concern for other businesses. And I've got a couple of ideas to share with you in my worked answer. Well, up to you. If you want to pause the video, maybe have a think about how you might construct maybe the counter argument why businesses should not be concerned. And what I'm going to do now is just walk through my draft answer and also highlighting where I've used some application, both from the case study, Chillax, but also bringing in some other examples, and also to show you how I would have had a go at evaluating or concluding this 16 marker. Let's start, as I said, with that structure by dealing with the case study first. So deal with the case study. So as always, we're using a pecan pie approach here because we need a little bit of evaluation. You don't have to, but I've added a little bit of evaluation at the end of this argument. But we start with our point explained. Chillax would be concerned about a high rate of labour turnover as they have a competitive advantage from their low rate of labour turnover. Full stop. Point explained. Don't go any further. It's then over to you to develop that point with your contextualized analysis. So let's have a look what we've got here. For example, so that's signaling a little bit of application here from the case study. In 2020, Chillax had a labour turnover rate of just 13.3%, which is less than half the industry average of 30%. If Chillax's labour turnover were to become high, for example, well above 30%, then management would be concerned. Trying to use the words of the question in the response. Concerned what about? Well, concerned about the wasted investment in staff training, particularly if the best employees leave to join competitor health spas. In the short term, this would result in lower ratings, or would likely result in lower ratings on the Chillax app for customer experience. And revenues might also fall, for example, if popular exercise class leaders or treatment specialists took their regular clients with them to a different club. There we go. Bit of contextualized analysis as to why Chillax should be concerned, and now a little bit of evaluation at the end. Of course, the extent to which Chillax might be concerned would depend on which employees were leaving and how easily they might be replaced by staff with similar skills. But it's likely that some of the best staff would be amongst those leaving. And I've highlighted in red there. Did you spot the application? I drew from the data in the case study, did a little calculation as well, which is less than half the industry average. So just comparing two pieces of data. I mentioned the Chillax app, which is mentioned as a means of measuring customer experience, and also did a bit of such as seizing, didn't I? So if popular exercise class leaders or treatment specialists took their clients, rather than customers, clients with them to a different club. So just trying to use application to root that particular paragraph in the context of the Chillax case study. Now we've dealt with Chillax, 16-mark open question. We need to think about situations where other businesses or other business situations where they might not be concerned with high labour turnover. I wonder what you came up with. What do you think? I've gone with this argument. In many other cases, businesses may not be concerned about high rates of labour turnover if these are normal for the industry or if the business benefits from high labour turnover. So let's try to explain to the examiner why that might be the case. So, for example, industries which rely on the use of temporary or seasonal labour, such as hospitality and farming, are used to operating with high labour turnover, and rather than it being a concern, it actually helps them keep production costs down when demand is low, when you don't need seasonal or temporary labour. Similarly, some businesses might also view before I go on to it, provided that there is enough supply of labour to meet requirements, high labour turnover at the end of a busy hotel season or when the crops are harvested is not a concern. Now, in theory, you could end there, but I just wanted to extend this point about maybe another situation where businesses might not be concerned. So similarly, some businesses might view high labour turnover as a way of bringing new skills or experience into the business. For example, and I went with football clubs because they are businesses after all, football clubs typically have a high turnover of managers and players each season and use frequent recruitment and sacking of employees, managers often, as a way of trying to achieve their sporting and business objectives. Of course, benefiting from high labour turnover, this is a bit of evaluation at the end, requires that there be a large supply of replacement workers of the right quality. So it's sort of an it depends on point, doesn't it? You need to make sure you've got enough people to replace the ones that have left or been sacked. And also, businesses need to make sure that they have the right financial rewards to attract the labour that they need. So basically arguing that there are some situations, I guess, particularly around this sort of temporary seasonal demand for labour, where actually high labour turnover isn't a concern. Well, there's two balanced arguments there, but we need a conclusion, don't we? And it doesn't really matter what you conclude. You've provided the examiner with some balance, but try to answer the question and then justify it. So, by the way, so there's a little bit of just putting the application on the screen there. Hospitality, farming, just made up a couple of examples. Hotel season, when the crops are harvested, football clubs, players and managers. So trying to provide some application that rather than using generic terms. Okay, so here's the conclusion. And as I say, it doesn't really matter what you conclude, as long as it's answering the question and it's supported by your arguments. So here's my conclusion. Whilst for some businesses, high levels of labour turnover are not a concern, for most businesses, high labour turnover is likely to be bad news. And I think that's pretty much the case, isn't it? Most businesses don't want to have high labour turnover. So as argued above, this is particularly the case for businesses like Chillax, which provide a service and where the quality of that service is linked to having skilled, experienced employees who are highly engaged in what they're doing. And this will be the case in other sectors. So just bring in some extra application now, not a new argument, but this will be the case in other sectors such as professional services, healthcare, and of course, education, where high labour turnover is a concern. For example, because of the high costs of recruiting and training staff, as well as the potential costs of poor quality. So now a little bit of it depends. As mentioned, the extent to which businesses should be concerned is linked to whether high labour turnover is normal in an industry. However, even where high labour turnover is normal, there are likely to be some businesses that are particularly bad at retaining their staff and who therefore are right to be concerned at being a competitive disadvantage. And I just highlighted there where my conclusion just added in a little bit of extra value in terms of application. So not a new point. We don't want new arguments in our conclusions, but ideally just add in a little bit of extra application to help support the preceding argument. And I reckon, taken together, those 3 paragraphs will be more than enough to get a good mark on this 16-mark question. Hopefully you found that useful. Cheers.